Hi, boys and girls. It's time for another story. Our story today is called Androclus and the Lion. Androclus. He lived in a really bad time in our world history, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, back in the days of gladiators, and when they had big arenas and coliseums where somebody did something against their law. The people were thrown in that arena and they let wild beasts in to kill them. And people sat around and cheered for those wild animals. It was an awful time. It was also a bad time in our history that there were hundreds and thousands and probably millions of slaves. And if you were to run away and they caught you, it was a death sentence. Well, back to our story. Androclus, he had been running and running and running and running as hard as he could go. He could hardly breathe, and his legs, the muscles in his legs ached so bad. But he had reached the forest, the only place that he thought he would be safe from the soldiers. He was a runaway slave. When he got to the forest, he looked around, and every little pine cone that fell down on the moss, look, Androclus, he looked this way and he looked that way. Was it a soldier coming to get him? It was a frightening place to be. And then he thought, I wonder if I can survive here. I do know how to dig roots that are edible, and I could eat berries. But there was no other safe place for him to go. Well, by this time in the day, it was starting to get close to evening. And the smell in the air was of rain. And he thought, oh, I gotta find a place to sleep, a place to hide for the night. I don't want to get rained on. All he had with him was the cloak that he had on. It was like a little tunic. That was what the men wore in those days. And especially the slaves, they wore short tunics. He didn't want to get wet. Well, then he looked around to see if he could see any place that might work for the night. And ahead of him, he saw a little crack in the rock wall. And he thought, that might be a place for me to go and to hide for the night. So he set off over to that crack. But before he got up to that rock wall, there by the crack was something that was huge, but he hadn't seen it. Androclus looked and his eyes got big. There lay a male lion, a full-grown male lion. And Androclus, his instincts kicked in and he started to run as fast as he could run the other way. When he got far away, he got behind one of those big trees. He peeked out around the corner, but he hadn't heard the sound of the paws of that lion running behind him. And when he looked, that lion was still sitting over there by that rock crack. And the lion hadn't moved except for his head when he'd watched the man run away. But there was something that wasn't right. Androclus knew it. There had to be something wrong with that lion. Lions just don't lay when their prey runs away. They go out and they get them. And he thought, I sure hope that lion has eaten today. But the more he looked at that lion, the more he knew that there was something majorly wrong. So he got up and very softly, very slowly, he made his way back over to that lion. And the lion didn't move. The only thing that moved was his eyes as he watched Androclus come closer. Androclus, he looked at his eyes and he thought, they look sad. But then the more he looked, he said, you look like you hurt. Are you in pain? Well, of course, the lion couldn't answer him, but the lion just sat there. Androclus reached out his hand and he petted that big mane on that big male lion. And he thought, you must be hurt. So as he petted, he made his way around the lion. He looked at this leg and he felt of his back. He couldn't see anything there. He felt of the back leg. And then he saw it, a great big gash in the leg of that lion. And it was bleeding. There was a big pool of blood under that lion. He was hurt. And Androclus, he kept talking to that lion. He said, oh my, you're hurt. And he kept petting him. And he got back up to by the lion's head and he said, I'm going to try to help you. Do you understand? I won't hurt you. I'm going to try to help you. The only clothes, like I said, that Androclus had was what he had on. But he picked up the skirt of his tunic and he put it between his teeth and he ripped. And he tore off a long strip of his tunic. And he kind of showed that to the lion. He said, I'm going to wash your leg. And then I'm going to bandage it to see if I can make it better. We're going to make you better. And he kept petting gently, ever so gently, on that lion. Well, he had to find a place where there was a little bit of water. And he finally found some water. And he wrung out that little rag. And he came back to the lion. He said, I'm here to help you. And he started washing that bloody leg. And then he took that long strip of material and he wrapped that leg all up. Then he went back to the front of the lion and he petted him some more. He said, I'll do it again tomorrow. We'll make you well. Then he went over to that crack in the rock, and sure enough, that was an opening into a good-sized cave. Well, Androclus, he went in. After running all that way to the forest from the city, he was really tired. And he laid down on that dry cave floor, and almost instantly he was sound asleep. Well, after what seemed like a long time to Androclus, he woke up and he heard something. He heard the sound of something shuffling, and he looked up, and here came that lion, and he was shuffling along on his tummy toward Androclus. And when he got real close to him, he lay down and he sighed. Oh. And the lion went to sleep right there beside him. He didn't hurt him at all. So Androclus, he had said his prayers to Jesus and he went to sleep. Well, the next day, Androclus took care of that leg of that lion again. And you know, the story says that for weeks he and his lion lived in that cave together. And every day Androclus would go out and he had found a stream, a spring where there was water, and he would go find things for them to eat. Well, it wasn't too long till the leg of that lion was strong enough that the lion could walk on it. And the lion would go out and he would find what lions eat, and he would eat his food. And Androclus, he would find berries and he would dig roots, and it was all going very well. And then one morning, Androclus, he got up and he went out to that spring to get water. The story doesn't tell what he carried water in, but he must have figured out something. But when he was bent over to get that water, all of a sudden there was something very, very sharp poking him in the back of his neck. And Androclus, he looked up from where he was kneeling down by that water, and there stood a soldier with a long spear poking into the back of his neck. And a gruff, growly voice said, "You know, they pay really good rewards for runaway slaves now. Come on, get up slow." Well, there was nothing Androclus could do. So he stood up, and the man tied a rope around him so he couldn't run away. And with his spear behind him, they walked all that way back to that big city. And Androclus was taken to the emperor. Now, an emperor is kind of like the king of a big country, and he had to go to that court with the emperor as judge. And the emperor, the man had told the emperor, he's a runaway slave. And Androclus stood there in front of the emperor, and the emperor said, "Are you a runaway slave?" He couldn't lie. So he told the emperor yes, and the emperor sentenced him to death. Poor Androclus. They took him to one of those big arenas that I told you about. And down underneath the seats of that arena, there were little rock cells that had gates on the front that you couldn't get through. Androclus, he sat in there looking at those bars. The only thing he could do was pray. And that's what he did. Well, it wasn't too long till they came to get Androclus. The soldiers shoved him out into that arena, and it was full of people. Those people, they started to shout, "Kill him! Kill him!" Androclus, as quick as he could, he walked to the very farthest part away from where he could see bars in front of where they kept the animals. It wasn't long till one of those gates went up, and after being starved for several days and prodded by the soldiers and poked with their spears, this lion came roaring out of that cage. And he was hungry and he was mad. And in the distance, he saw Androclus. And that lion started running as fast as he could run toward Androclus. And Androclus thought, what can I do? But his muscles tightened up, just like he was going to protect himself. but he knew he couldn't protect himself against a lion. So he shut his eyes and he prayed, which was the only thing he could do. And while he could hear that lion getting closer to him. And while he had his eyes closed, the lion stopped, but he didn't dare open his eyes. And then he felt something. It was strange. It wasn't the claws of the lion. It wasn't his big teeth. It was his tongue. And when he opened his eyes, the lion was licking his face, just like a dog would lick your face. Then Androclus looked at that lion closer. It was his lion from the forest. They must have caught him. Well, that lion, it sat down and looked at him just like a puppy would. And it was no longer roaring. It no longer looked mad. It rubbed itself against Androclus. And the people that had been yelling, when that lion had come running out, the people had stood up and cheered. They were cheering for the lion to kill Androclus. But when they saw what the lion was doing, it was absolutely silent in there. Now the king, the emperor, was there. He had a royal box that he sat in, and he watched all these punishments. Well, he stood up, and he looked down at where Androclus was, and he looked at that lion sitting there rubbing against him, and he called out, "Androclus, come here!" And Androclus got up and he walked. That lion, his lion, didn't hurt him at all. And Androclus, he walked over to that emperor's box, and the emperor looked down at him. And then the emperor turned to his soldiers and he said, "Bring him up here." So they brought Androclus up into the box with the king. And that king, the emperor, he said, "Tell me what we just saw down there. Tell me about that." He'd never seen a lion not eat a man. So Androclus, he started to tell his story. He told how he had ran away and he'd run to the forest where he thought he would be safe. And how, as he was going along, it was getting close to dark, and he saw the crack in the rock, and he thought he would spend the night there. But when he had walked over and got close, there had sat that lion that he didn't know was there, that big male lion, and how he had run away. And then when he'd looked around the tree, he had thought that there was something wrong with that lion, and he had gone back. And how the lion just looked at him and he looked sad, and then he looked like he was in pain. And Androclus had talked to him and how he had petted him, and he'd looked to see where he was hurt, and he found that big gash, and how they'd lived together for weeks in that cave in the rock, and the lion had never hurt him, and how Androclus had made the lion's leg well. Until that day that the soldier had found him at the spring. And Androclus stopped talking and he said, "And that's my lion." And the emperor, he said, so everybody in that arena could hear, he said loudly, "Androclus and his lion are free to go." And then the emperor said something else, and I want to share it with you, and I want to make sure exactly what he said is what you hear. So I may read part of it. Such amazing kindness and gratitude between fierce enemies should be greatly rewarded. Well, boys and girls, kindness is one of the greatest things that Jesus has taught us. Kindness to animals, kindness to other people. And what the emperor was saying was a lion and a man are both fierce enemies. But Androclus had been kind to that lion, and he was rewarded for his kindness. You know, it doesn't tell us any more about Androclus, but that story was recorded and passed on down through those hundreds and hundreds of years. You be kind to people and to animals, boys and girls, and you'll be doing just what Jesus wants you to do. Thank you, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye now.